Hello, my name is Tina, and I will be talking to you today about my experiences with entities, not necessarily ghosts, but entities, and how I dealt with them, and more importantly, how I didn't deal with them. Now, I always believed that we are surrounded by things that we cannot see. And all throughout my life, I have only had confirmation of that. Especially when you start to work with magic, that is when you will undoubtedly discover that these things are very real, and you might even start to attract them whether you want to or not. This can be also something very benign, like tarot card readings, not even tarot cards, but just anything that you do to gain an insight in yourself. Sooner or later, you will attract the attention of something that isn't human. Now, not all my experiences have been bad ones. I have had very good experiences too. And I'll maybe start with that. In the valley where I live in a very small mountain town in Italy. This is a very old place. It has been here for centuries. And that valley, the forest in that valley, has been there for even longer. I have had encounters there that I have no way of explaining other than I just met a spirit. The first one was when I just moved here that same winter. I heard a disembodied voice singing to me. And it was always at the same spot. But it was like a whisper. It just something that you could mistake for something else. Maybe there were people nearby and I just didn't see them. But then something else happened. I was walking and I went a little bit off trail. And I was just enough off trail that I could still see the trail. And there's only one trail that you can go. You can either go that way or that way. And I heard singing very clearly, a woman's voice singing. And nobody came. I waited there for a moment, just waiting for somebody to pass by, and nobody passed by. I went back to the trail and looked left and right, and there was nobody there. There was just an incorporeal voice singing to me. And that was all that happened. I didn't get any threatening feeling from that. I wasn't really made to be afraid either. It was just something that happened and that I have no explanation for. Another thing that happened down in that valley was something that frightened the living daylights out of me. And I was very frightened, actually, because I was down there alone. I was in the deepest part of the valley, and I went through a path that usually only hunters use. And maybe I shouldn't have been there, or I shouldn't have imposed myself on such a place. But I made my way through the thickets, and all of a sudden I feel two hands on my knee pulling me back. This was the scariest thing that ever happened to me in that valley. On the bright side, what didn't happen is that I got hurt. On the contrary, that two hands touched me on a bad knee, a knee that I had twisted a long time ago in a work accident. And every once in a while, it acts up again. It blocks up, it locks up. And then I have to let it rest because it's impossible to move a lot on a locked knee. It's very painful. That happens with the hands touching me, and that knee has never locked up again, ever. Now I'm very grateful for that. I am extra respectful when I go down there now. I don't go down there unless I need something in terms of herbs. And I always leave something in return. The thought that stuck with me the most out of all of that was, if it can heal me, it can also hurt me. Now, it didn't hurt me, but just the thought alone that it could that was enough for me to never go down there and be disrespectful in any way or form. Now, things that have scared me in the past was when I started to hear things moving around the house. This has happened here in my house, but it has also happened when I was still in Belgium. And most importantly, it happened when I was very much into magical workings. I don't need to detail what I was doing. That's not really important. The point is that I always attracted the attention of these things when either there was turmoil in my life, in my emotional self, or when I was doing magical workings. Now, these magical workings, I don't necessarily mean that you have to have elaborate rituals. This can just mean that you're being creative. The act of creation is an act of magic, after all. This has happened to me several times when I was making runes. I make runes and I sell them. Now, I try very much not to put energy in those runes when I'm working with them, because they're not for me, they're for somebody else. Inevitably, some of my energy will always be transferred into them, but there isn't any intention behind that. Nevertheless, when I'm working on them, I get completely lost. And I mean lost. I'm gone for hours up here. But what I do notice that every time I get distracted is because of something incorporeal happening around me, or something moving or making a noise that isn't a person. I have had something very strange happen once. I was working on an order, and I was alone in the house, completely alone. And I look to my right side, where my living room is. There is a door there, and I see a person walking just like that. Now, my front door was closed. I was alone in the house. This was a spirit. Now, this spirit didn't talk. It didn't say anything. It didn't even glance at me. It was just there. But I attracted its attention somehow by being so focused on what I was doing. I was performing an act of creativity, an act of magic. I was making a change in the world around me by making something that wasn't previously there, the runes. Now, most of them are just curious, and there is no real need to deal with them. And if it's something like that person walking by and you get no sense of fear or no sense of threat, I would always just leave it alone. The less attention you give it, it's probably for the better. Because I've noticed that if you do give it attention, that's when the interest, they become more interested in you. And some of them you don't want to have interested in you. What is originally or can originally be just a spirit, an entity, having a mild interest in you can very quickly develop into something more impactful. It can become vampiric. You can feed it with your attention. And then once you start feeding it, it will expect to be fed. It will start to do things for you to give it attention. Attention is energy, and that's what they want. They just want your energy, your attention. So the less attention you give it, it's always for the better. Now, that is with these random encounters that you can have. It's something else when somebody sends something to you, because that is something, an entity, a spirit that has been sent to you with intent. And the intent is usually not a good one. On the contrary, it's almost always sent with a malicious intent behind it. That is something that you have to deal with in a different way. Still, the more attention you give it, the worse it will be. If you react very fearful or very hysterical, that's not good. You need to be as emotionless and as apathetic as you can possibly be, as much as you can. What I have known has helped are not elaborate rituals, are not goetic invocations or summoning powerful demons to help you. No, it's actually very simple. Salt, sea salt and vinegar. For some reason, those things work incredibly well when it comes to eliminating these energies from your house. You probably have heard other people say that, if you are somewhat in the same circles as me, that sea salt is, for whatever reason, there must be an alchemical process happening that is ephemeral, ethereal, that we're not consciously aware of, that eliminates these energies or neutralizes them. So sleep with salt under your bed. And just a little cup of salt. It's best that you change it every 3 days. Also, a little pouch of salt. Slip it in your pillow on your bed. Now, if you often perform magical workings in your house with intent behind them, meaning rituals, then the salt will eliminate those energies too. So if you don't do that, or at least you're willing to not do it for a while, knowing that somebody has sent something after you, you can put salt in every room of your house. Just a little bit. Doesn't have to be much, but change it often. Every 3 days you change it. And or hang them somewhere, it doesn't matter. And little dishes of vinegar. If you find it hard to get sea salt, then vinegar also works. For some reason, it works. I've also experienced that these activities seem to increase when there are mirrors in your house that are facing each other. So make sure they're not facing each other. Cover one up or make them not face each other. But whenever somebody is sending something to you, whether that is an entity of their own creation or something that they have summoned out of the ether, placing a mirror in your window, in all your windows, not a big one, just a small piece of mirror in every window facing outwards, is something that will also help. You have to combine all these things to make it most effective. Lots of people say that you should smudge and that you should use sage, white sage for it. That is partially true and partially bullshit. It doesn't have to be sage at all. It can be any herb that grows in your climate that you don't have to order from another part of the world or from another part of the continent. I live in Italy. Bay leaf and rosemary and peppermint grows everywhere here in the wild. You can find it everywhere. A mix of that, or even every single herb separately, will accomplish the same thing. Peppermint, for instance, is very easy to roll into a smudge stick. And then you can tie some bay leaf around it. It actually smells really nice, the combination. You can smudge with that just the same. If you live in colder European climates, then mugwort is very easy to find. You will find it next to every road. It's also easily to identify. Green on top, silver on the bottom, if you're not sure. And you always have to use it before it flowers. Somehow it's more potent, which is so for most plants, by the way. Cleaning your house is also rather important. because clutter in the house is usually an indication of clutter in the mind. What is in the head, in the mind, manifests outwardly, as within, so without. This is not meant to be judgmental towards anybody. If it doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother you. But for me personally, it's always been bothersome to have clutter in the house. And if it bothers me to have clutter in the house, then of course I'm going to add to my own internal turmoil. And if I add to my own internal turmoil, that is an energy that a negative entity loves to feed on. So I have to eliminate that. I clean my house, and what I regularly do is clean my house with salt water, sea salt. Yeah, you will go through a lot of salt, but it's not that expensive. Usually for a kilo, I buy a kilo of sea salt for less than €1. It doesn't need to be the finest sea salt you can find. The rough sea salt is very often even cheaper than the very fine one. And I wash my floors with it and surfaces. While, of course, I leave a window or the front door open, because whatever is in the house that you don't want there, you want it to leave. You don't want to be chasing it around the house. If you have a fireplace like mine, what you can also do is throw salt everywhere. Just toss it around a little bit. You don't need to do any invocations. You don't need to talk to the spirit of the salt. No. It's just the salt that matters, and you throw it everywhere. Make sure that you throw it through the air, and also especially in the darker corners of your house, like behind doors and corners, and just clean it up. Leave it there for an hour maybe. You can go out for a bit or not. You leave it there for a little bit. You come back and you clean. You just wipe it all up, put it in your dustbin. And if you have a fireplace and a fire burning, what I do is just I burn it, and you will see it sparkle up through the chimney, and gone it is. Now, it's also a doorway in your house. So lots of people, even in Italy, have witch symbols carved into their fireplace in order for a spirit to be able to leave, but not come back in. That's what it's for. It's an old folk belief that witches would come through the chimney. And that seems to be very pervasive all over Europe and also the Slavic countries, from what I've heard. Talking about Slavic countries, this is probably a familiar word for Polish people. The domowy is a house spirit. Now, house spirits, even in Italy, there is this idea of house spirits. They're called differently, and I kind of forgot what they're called. But this is also a very pervasive idea in Europe, that a house has a house spirit. Where does it come from? Who knows? Who knows? But it is usually a spirit that cares for the house. Not as in it will take care of the house, it cares for the house because it's its home. Is this the collective and combined energy of every single person that lived in that house before you? Possibly. Will your energy be added to that collective? Possibly. But they do seem to take on their own personal personalities. I have, in this house, I cannot be annoyed. And, well, I can be annoyed. But when I'm annoyed, I am not allowed to be loud and be loud with furniture, which I admit that I have a habit of sometimes when I'm in a very bad mood, I will push a chair or just be a bit loud with my cup, knocking it down on the table. And I have a door here, right there. That is the door to another room, obviously. And when I do that, when I'm in a very annoyed mood and I start to make noises with furniture or just utensils, that door will move. It will move in a creaking. Sometimes it just opens, sometimes it just closes, sometimes it does both. And it's not a hostile feeling that I'm getting, never. It's just a message from whatever spirit lives in this house, whatever house spirit is in this house, to say, to tell me, don't do that. I don't like it. Now, some people, I understand it, would be thoroughly creeped out by that. Personally, I'm just not creeped out by it. I am, because like I said, it doesn't feel hostile. It doesn't feel threatening. It doesn't feel like it wants to hurt me. If I really think about it, it's kind of funny even. It seems to be having a sense of humor with the door. I see that Jade is asking a question about, can you please direct us where we can find the symbols to put on the fireplace? Well, the best thing is to make your own, I think. If you're into runes, you can make your own bind rune, or your own sigils. And you don't necessarily need to carve it in the fireplace either. Like this one is very, very old. I wouldn't want to carve in it. But what I do is just like make a little clay tablet, for instance, carve it in that, and then put it on the fireplace. That's something you can do. But yeah, I've always found that it's best to make your own, because you can put your own intent in there as well. That's the idea with magic in the end. Somebody says bathing in salt water. Yeah, exactly. That is also a folk belief that if you seem to be haunted by a spirit, that you have to cross running water because the spirit cannot cross it. So yeah, bathing in salt water, but also in general, standing under a shower seems to be an effective way how to deal with spirit that is attached to you. If you don't have a shower, then you can also put salt water in your bath and sit in your bathtub. Otherwise, you can stand under the shower. Cold water is best. Also because the shock effect gets you out of that mindset. Let me see if there's some other questions. No. Well, another thing that I do regularly is clean my mirrors with vinegar. I don't know what it is about the vinegar. I just don't know, but it works. I have a sense of cleanliness when I use vinegar. So I use it often, mostly on mirrors and windows. In the mirror, I am not very superstitious about mirrors, and I don't mind having them in the house. I don't even personally mind them facing each other when it's serving a purpose. But when you're already having a lot of spirit activity in your house and it's bothersome to you, then it's best not to have them face each other. In your bedroom, especially, it's always best to cover one up, to cover it up, especially when you are dealing with somebody who you don't know, who is sending malintent towards you. Even if they're not actually trying to send an entity to you, the bad intention of the other person, the evil eye, so to say, can take on a form of its own, a thought form. It's an entity, but it is not a self-conscious entity necessarily. While most entities that I have had personal encounters with have been self-conscious, when it comes from a person that just hates your guts for whatever reason and wishes ill upon you, that ill intent sent towards you, that takes on a form of itself. It doesn't really matter how you deal. you deal with it just the same way as any other spirit. It doesn't really matter. Is that a demon? Maybe. Maybe. I am not really sure about how to be calling different entities, whether there are demons, nature spirits, and then the different nominations within nature's spirits, fire spirits, water spirits. I don't know. One thing that I would caution against is if you do believe in elemental spirits, personally I do, it probably wouldn't be a good idea to start summoning them or invoking them in your house. A spirit is capricious. They don't live by the same rules as us. What is a joke to them can be a danger to you. For instance, summoning a fire spirit. You can have a fire start in your house. For the entity, it may be just a joke. For you, it can be a very, very expensive joke, and even a lethal joke. Your water spirit, well, you can have a pipe breaking down. These are just examples, of course. Now, that doesn't always have to go bad, of course, but it's best to be safe in your own home and try not to tempt things to go wrong. Now, there is also the matter, like I said, when somebody is so ill-intended toward you that they send something towards you that becomes a sort of entity in itself, you can do the same. You can create an entity. This is a tulpa or an egregore. They're not exactly the same, but we don't need to go into difference right now, but you can create your own thought form. Now, in fear of sounding a bit cliche, this is often what a familiar spirit is. You hear this in these witchcraft groups a lot, the familiar spirit. Oh, I got a familiar. Oh, I got 35 familiars. They can have as many as they want, but yeah, you can create one for yourself. What is it for? Well, that depends what you want it for. What is it supposed to do for you? You can make it a protective spirit of the house. You can make it a protective spirit for you. Some people also like to bind spirits into objects. Let's say a necklace, a piece of jewelry. Well, I don't know how I feel about that. It feels hostile to me to do that to an entity. You do what you need to do. I won't be telling you what not to do. I will tell you though that I think I have made or at least helped create a negative entity around me once. It was when I moved here and I wasn't in the best state of mind mentally. I was rather down, thinking about a lot of things and questioning myself a lot. And it was during a winter, and I was talking to somebody about something completely unrelated and unimportant. But we were sitting right here at this table, and I could feel myself getting upset. Not for anything that these people were saying, it was just myself. I had very little control over my own thoughts, my own thought patterns. And I could feel myself slipping into a mood. And all of a sudden, right there, something falls. Just falls on the floor out of nowhere. It wasn't my cat. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't something that could be falling. No, that was why it was weird. That's why we were all looking at each other like, did that just happen? And we were all at the verge of saying something. And at the other end of the room, something else flies off the pantry, flies off to the middle of the floor. And I think that was not necessarily this house spirit or something that somebody sent to me. I think it was my own fault because I had so little control over my own emotions at the time and also my own thoughts, which is important. It's one of the axioms of magic is to know yourself. And to know yourself is also to know when to put the brakes on up here. Don't let yourself go down a spiral, a self-destructive spiral, which I was probably most likely doing at the time. And I didn't stop myself, and something happened that made it poignantly obvious that I should stop with those thoughts. That said, I don't know if any one of you are familiar with the channel of Jerry Marzinski. Marzinski is a psychotherapist, I believe, who has worked with schizophrenics for a very long time. In fact, for most of his professional career, has worked with schizophrenics. And he has come to the conclusion that the voices that the schizophrenics hear are not hallucinations, but that they are entities, vampiric entities that live off the misery of these people, making them isolated, alone, and most of all, being looked at as crazy. Now, if you want Jerry Marzinski, if you type his name in YouTube, you will find him. I think his full YouTube name is Engineering Mental Sanity - Jerry Marzinski. But I think, and he said this too, and I think he's right, is that we all encounter this. But for some reason, the schizophrenic person has less of a defense against them. Usually has to do with abuse in their past. And of course, abuse always makes you more vulnerable to these negative vampiric spirits because they just feed off your misery. So these people, they already had their psychic defenses down and they have no real way to deal with these very intrusive thoughts. Well, for us, we have a very intrusive thought and we can brush it off like, oh. But if you've been subject to abuse for most of your life, or especially during childhood, that can be much more difficult because you also start to believe all the negative things about yourself even before those voices start, because schizophrenia tends to start in adulthood, not in childhood. So when it's imprinted upon you as a child that you're not worth anything, you're crazy, you are alone, nobody likes you, you're ugly, you're this, you're that, you will start to believe that about you. And these entities will latch onto that, reinforcing that belief over and over and over, making you feel very, very miserable and alone. And so they stay with you because that is their food, that is their food source. Now, I had an experience myself where I am absolutely certain that something like that happened to me. I was in Belgium and I hated my job. I truly, truly hated my job. I was so sick of working my job. And I was looking for a way to get out. And at the same time, I kept thinking inside that same box, like, yeah, but what am I going to do? This is the only thing I know how to do. I have to start all over again. Am I going to clean houses? Am I going to all sorts of negative thoughts that weren't even worth thinking about in retrospect. But I did think them at the time. And I was on a bike. And I was with somebody else. And we were just going for a bike ride just on my free day. Excuse me. Because that's just something we had planned. And I was biking, admittedly, not where I should have been biking, but it wasn't that big of a deal because there was nobody else on the street. It was where the people had to walk and you couldn't really bike there. But also the person in front of me was biking there. So it didn't, we were going slow anyway. Anyway, there was this woman, this typical Karen, with a small little doggy that completely ignored the person in front of me. But for some reason, almost got right in front of me and started very snarkily telling me, like, this is not a bike lane, you shouldn't be here. And I was so shocked by her. And at the same time, I remember thinking and being aware of it at the time, that this thought came from somewhere else but me, because I don't usually think these things. I can think them as a joke, but not serious like I was thinking it then. But it was like a voice inside my head that said, just toss her in the river. Because we were next to the river. And for a moment, I actually considered it. It sounded so convincing. And it would have been one of the biggest mistakes I could have ever made if I had listened to that voice. She could have gotten seriously hurt. This woman was not the youngest. She could have died if I had actually done that. So I just said something insulting towards her, and I kept going. And we were going to the McDonald's. And I remember all the way to the McDonald's that my heartbeat was raised. That if I hadn't gone forward on my journey, then I might have actually tossed her in, even though that thought came out of nowhere. I have never had a thought like that. In retrospect, in retrospect, I sometimes think these things like, oh, I should have. But it's more of a coping mechanism more than anything else. Like, no, I genuinely had that thought in that moment, thinking, just toss her in the river. Do it. And it was the do it at the end that made me realize, like, this is not me. This is something else speaking, whispering to the back of my brain. So I got lucky, I think. Something in me thinks that if I had given into that everything, my whole life, might have turned out extremely, extremely differently. Now, who knows if that would have happened that way? I don't know. But I think we all, like Jerry Marzinski says, have these entities whispering to our brains. And that they feel like thoughts that are not our own. So we have to be careful of our own thoughts. Again, know thyself. If you know yourself, you know when something is not coming from you, when it is coming from somewhere else. I'm seeing a few comments here. Yeah, I think Eckhart Tolle mentions schizophrenic behavior in one of his books. That's possible. I haven't read his books, but yeah, what you're saying there, schizophrenic just blabs it out, and we play them quietly in our heads. That's possible. It's almost like we go into a discussion with ourselves. We play it in our heads as a dialogue almost. I once took a blanket from a family I did not know, but knew how they looked. First night I slept under that blanket, I dreamt of how the previous owner argued with each other. That's very interesting. It's possible though. I believe that can happen. Yeah, I think that sometimes it's like with most hauntings, for instance, these aren't actually ghosts or actual spirits. I think that sometimes the material that you're surrounded with just takes on the energetic imprint of their surroundings. And it just plays over and over like a loop almost. And you can pick up on that. Like when you hear these stories about the white ladies, excuse me, in old castles or headless ghosts, I think those are just imprints. I don't think those are actual entities that are conscious of themselves. I think those are just playback loops. Personally, I also think that when you go to these ghost hunter channels, probably know a few of them, that I think that you're never talking to the spirits of the dead. I don't think. I think you're talking to an entity. Now, are you talking to a demon? Are you talking to something of a more benign nature? Who knows? But what I do know is that you should never, ever, ever, ever believe them at face value. Whatever they tell you, they have an agenda, always. So be careful. Be very careful. Use discernment. That's all I can really say about that. Spirits, what they want the most is attention, energy. Your attention is energy. So you should be careful. And a lot of mediums say they are talking to angels and archangels. They're not. I'm not saying that it is impossible for a person to have a connection with the divine. On the contrary, even, I believe that is very possible, and I think that is possible for each and every one of us here to have a personal connection with the divine. But once the divine start telling you that you should try to convince people or start to form cult-like structures or start to build things in your environment that will somehow affect people, that's not really, that is exactly how spirits work. They want to affect you in such a way that you will give them energy, whether you are conscious about it or not. So be careful, be very careful. I once heard a video about, maybe some of you know him, but Thomas Sheridan, about a video he made about a psychic medium that somehow mediumed a spirit and said that they had to build a pyramid in the house and it had to have an iron rod as a sort of lightning rod through the pyramid into the ground. And all sorts of bad stuff started happening. This person on whose land it was had all matters of bad luck happening to him and didn't know how to stop it. Well, that medium completely disappeared afterwards. So what was she really doing there? She was indeed a medium, but she wasn't talking to aliens. She wasn't talking to angels. She was talking to a vampiric, malintended, malicious entity. So be careful. There are warnings to clear vibrational patterns of objects owned by others, which it has absorbed. Yeah, it's probably always a good idea to be careful. Now, I love going around secondhand shops. I absolutely love it. And I love buying secondhand stuff. But yeah, it's true. When an object feels off, or you just have this intuition, this gut feeling of no matter how cheap or how beautiful it is, that you just shouldn't get it, then leave it. And if you do get it, then it's probably a good idea to put it in a circle of salt for a week or so. Wash it down a little bit with salt water if you can, smudge it if you can. Yeah. Oh, wash it, yeah, indeed. Wash it with some salt water if you can. Some objects are of a material that makes it hard, but yeah, if you can wash it with salt water. I think I have said most of what I wanted to say about how I deal with spirits. Now, Of course, before anyone asks, I should probably say, is it possible or that you can call spirits in? Of course, of course. In fact, lots of magicians and lots of witches and even shamans are actually demonologists without really realizing it. When they work a lot with spirits, more appropriate description for them is demonologist. But I know how it sounds. It sounds a bit off-putting and it comes with all sorts of religious connotations. So I try not to use the word, but that's really what they are. If you work with spirits a lot, you might actually be a demonologist. But yeah, the word demon has so many, like I said, so many religious connotations to it that I don't really want to get into that. But yeah, you can work with spirits and you can call them, and it can be very, very beneficial to you. And it can also be absolutely detrimental if you're gullible. And I have seen gullible people trying to work with entities, and this has never worked out in their favor. They have destroyed themselves. This is why I personally don't work with the Goetia. Now, I have seen people have great success with the Goetia, and all of them were very extremely disciplined people. And I don't mean just physical disciplines, mental disciplines. They had such self-control to an extent that I don't think I can reach. So I leave it alone. Now, if you have developed this kind of mental discipline, that you know yourself through and through and through, that you know, can discern without any question, without any doubt, when it's the spirit talking to you or when a thought comes from you directly. Yeah, I would not advise against working with spirits, but people that are very heavily into drugs and alcohol should never do that, ever. Like, for instance, when you get blackout drunk, usually a lot of people will just collapse in bed or wherever they are on the sofa and fall asleep. And then, but there's always this moment right before that happens that you don't remember what you did. And very often that is when you start to drunk text or drunk message and you say the most awful and heinous stuff to people that you later come to regret. Who's doing that? You're blacked out. You're gone. Something else came in and did that, causing havoc in your life. So if you're already at the point of severe or of alcoholism or drug abuse to the point of addiction, you should stay away from this stuff altogether. This is just an advice, of course. But there's a reason you do that. Probably because of pain in your own life or in your past that you're trying to get away from and that you're just not able to face otherwise. Spirit is already attracted to that. You're not going to get a lot of good spirits coming in. And the ones that will come in will try to convince you they're good. But at the end, you will be paying the price for it. And I think that has been my talk so far. Now, if anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. I will sit here and wait a little bit. And if, well, in a few minutes and there aren't any questions, how do you understand the expression, you have to face your own demon? Well, that is, of course, everything about yourself. that you don't even want to know about yourself. Now, I'm not claiming that I know myself through and through. I don't. But I have gone through a phase in my life where I had to face my own destructive patterns, meaning that I, at some point, had the habit of drinking. And I drank because if I didn't, I started to think about things that happened to me. And those thoughts were destructive to the fantasy I had built up in my own head, convincing myself that certain things in my life were a certain way, while they were in fact not. So the drinking helped me reinforce my own delusion. And that was my demon at that time. Now, do I have a different demon that I have to face now? Oh, boom, undoubtedly, undoubtedly. We all do. We don't always have the same demons to face. But yeah, it is the things about yourself that you don't want to face. And we don't want to face them because they are ugly and very often also painful. So that's how I understand it, to face your own demon. Can you tell us how you came to the runes? Oh, very early in life. Very early. It started when I was a teenager, actually, but I didn't seem to have any connection with it at the time, and I just left it. And then at some point in my life, I started to redevelop the interest because I don't even really know. Yeah, it's because I was going through such a hard time that I started to look at other means. Like, okay, I cannot find the solution to my issues. Going through unions and going through all sorts of government facilities that re-educate myself, or it all seemed so useless to me. So I turned to runes, and it was also bad. Every rune reading I did was bad, and I couldn't understand it. And that's to go back to the drinking that I just said, how to face your own demon. This was all interconnected with each other. So the rune readings, they were never wrong. I was my own worst enemy at the time. And then later, after everything, in retrospect, when I started to think about it again, like, the runes never lied to me. They always told me the path forward, and I just refused to do it or refused to see it. Of course, they were always negative because I was always self-sabotaging myself. And once I came to that realization, I made a promise to myself, I will never, ever be so dismissive of these things ever again. That's the short version for how I came into contact with the runes. Have you used sacred times, places, and other things to distinguish what was coming from you and what was related to different beings? No. If I have been to sacred places, and I have to say that when I was at some places, the feeling that I got there was so overwhelmingly benign, and it made me feel very good and elated and curious, and even like, wow, this place is amazing kind of feeling. But it wasn't ever an intrusive thought. And that's, I think, how I know that feeling that was attached to this place actually came from entities of sorts, because I wasn't feeling that way, like, wow, look at this place, until I was there for a while and let that sink in for a little bit. So I think the intrusive thoughts, we just pick up on them more quickly because they're so negative. But the good ones, we don't tend to notice it that much, even though they're also there, personally. it's like they say, like well, the negative things we just tend to remember better for whatever reason. So yeah, I do think we pay more attention to negative entities than we do to the ones that are not negative towards us. When I say not negative towards us, I mean the ones that are either indifferent or or I don't want to say positive, because an actual positive entity usually just ignores you. They don't try to really interfere with your life. Then again, I'm not saying they can't or they never will. Sometimes they do, like the one that I had with the knee. But then again, it scared me shitless. I was really scared at the time. It was only later that I found out that my knee stopped hurting. But no, I don't go to places with the intent of talking to entities. I have gone to megalithic sites and have encountered entity activity, but I didn't go there with the intent to. It was just a byproduct of being there, which were rather fascinating, I have to say. When I was at the megaliths here, not far from here, they're very old, and I was the only one there. I shouldn't have been there because it was during lockdowns. And I heard conversations in the bushes. Now, my car was the only one that was at that parking lot. You had to climb down, and then there was a huge area, but you could also see pretty far and wide. There was nobody there, but there were some thickets and bushes around us, and I could hear conversations in those bushes in a language that I had never heard before. I couldn't distinguish it, but there were so clearly people talking, but there was nobody there. I didn't try to get into any kind of contact then, also because I wasn't up for it. Excuse me. I just wasn't. I find it beneficial sometimes to face my own demon rather than to run away from it. Yeah, it's best not to run away from yourself. It also comes back to the know thyself. It's not all love and light out there. Some things are horrible. I mean, things that can happen to people can be very awful and very horrible. And it's best that we don't run away from that, because in the end, we're just running away from ourselves. We can have very negative thoughts and very negative self images and very painful memories. And it's best that we don't run away from them. That doesn't mean that we have to ruminate over them every single time. Sometimes we can just say, like, okay, it's been enough. I have grieved or I have mourned enough. Now it is time to move on. But you do need to give yourself the time to grieve and to mourn. And I think that can indeed help you grow a lot. Just because you can admit to yourself that you can have very bad experiences and thoughts and emotions, that doesn't make you a bad person in any way. It, it just makes you honest to yourself, first and foremost. And you owe honesty to yourself, I think. Because if not, then what does it lead to? Escapism, or in my case, problematic drinking. Is that better? Probably not. But yeah, I mean, sometimes to face my own demon, not all the time. Because then when it becomes also a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy after a certain while, that you are always facing all the negative sides and aspects of yourself, you start to feel really shitty about yourself too. You need to give yourself some time to recuperate, learn from your mistakes. Because if you're always feeling shitty, then again, you're going to attract the attention of some entity that's just going to start whispering to the back of your head again and just feed off you. You're a buffet for them. So yeah, be honest, but also kind to yourself. I personally hate that saying, like, always be kind. No, you don't always need to be kind, but you do owe yourself some kindness, because very often we are our own harshest critics, more than anyone else. So we do owe it to ourselves to be a bit kind sometimes. If nobody has any more questions, I think I'm going to wrap this up. I'll give it a few minutes and have a sip of tea. No, thank you, Jade, and thank you all for being here and participating and engaging with questions and comments. And I did read them all. Sorry if I missed somebody, but this was also very enjoyable for me to talk about. I know I have a YouTube channel, but I'm very limited in my uploading there, so I cannot never really talk and talk and talk and talk like I did here. There are protective invocations of the highest light, which we are warned to consciously invoke before doing any work of spirit. Yeah, if these things work for you, then they work for you. I will never tell somebody not to do something if this person tells me this works for me. And if this works for you, it just works. I mean, no, I use runes, but if these runes don't work for you, then they don't work. Who knows why that is really? Maybe there is something to the whole thing that of ancestry. That's possible. Maybe the people that use the Goethe have a Jewish ancestry or a Semitic ancestry. I don't know. I can only tell you, if it works, it works. And then nobody should tell you not to use it, because it works for you. And it only needs to work for you in the end. It doesn't need to work for me. It's to work for you. Thank you for your time and thoughts. Well, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I think I will stop it here. And then I think Venice will also put it on YouTube at some point. You can always leave a comment there as well. I will check back in a while. So if there are any more follow-up questions, I'll be happy to answer them there. Thank you all, and have a good evening.